Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone this morning to our class. Are there any prayer requests this morning? Just one public service announcement, if you will. Sure has gotten a couple of emails and texts from DTE, and it's legit DTE, it's not scammers. And they're saying that there's fake DTE people coming around in DTE uniforms with a car that says DTE on it, trying to get into your house. When they get in, they're going to rob you. Somebody down in Rochester Hills it happened to, the guy put up a struggle, and he died. I don't know if he was shot or whatever, but DTE is putting this out that if somebody's coming to your house saying they're a DTE employee, there's no reason for them to randomly come to your house to want to come into it. Call DTE, don't open the door for them, because if they're sent, DTE would know it. But I guess this is big enough scam going on right now. Like I said, Sherry's received couple of notifications on it, and it's starting to spread out there. But somebody in Rochester Hills was killed because they let him in the house, and then when they realized what was happening, they struggled, and the one guy died. So watch out for yourself. People you know, you might pass that along. Will you bow with me, please? Father, we're so grateful for this morning you've given us. We thank you for this day that we get together to worship you in song and praise, Father. We get this time right now to study a portion of your word, and right now studying about Daniel and the things that are happening to your people and how Daniel's concerned about it. But as the angel is explaining that this will eventually, the suffering, come to an end. Father, let's always remember that you are always in charge, even though things look rough and grim for us. You have complete control of what's going on, and we need to rely on you completely. In Jesus' name, amen. We're still in Daniel, chapter 11. We're hitting verse 25. And this is basically what the book of Daniel has been pointing to, the pinnacle of talking about what's going to be happening to his people under Antiochus IV, and eventually all that torment and torture, the hardship is eventually going to end. And the bigger picture, Daniel is pointing to the coming of Christ, his birth, not the second coming. So that's what Daniel's really getting to the nuts and bolts about as we're toward the end of chapter 11, and we'll be hitting in chapter 12 in a little while. Any questions or comments about what we talked about last week? I talked a lot about, and I read quite a bit on the story that is recorded in the Maccabees about that one situation that the angel was talking about. So there was a lot there. We really didn't give you much time to talk about it. I don't know if there's any comments on that or anything that we're going to be getting into. Any questions before we begin? Daniel 11, 25, and 26. It's at the end of what we read on 23 through 26. Verse 25, he will stir up his strength and courage against the king of the south. The king of the south is being Ptolemy the sixth, and he being Antiochus the fourth. He'll stir up the king of the south with a large army, so the king of the south will mobilize an extremely large and mighty army for war, but he will not stand, for schemes will be devised against him. Those who eat choice foods will destroy him, and his army will overflow, but many will fall down slain. Verses 23 all the way through 28 is talking about the same story, the same situation going on, about the same alliance that we're going to be that we talked about in verse 23, and the same war and battle and conflict that we're talking about in 25 and 26. But each time the angel's talking to Daniel, he's given just a little bit more detail. And so when it looks like I might be backtracking or talking about a different story, it's all the same thing that's going on in verses 23 through 28. In verse 25, when it said he'll stir up his strength, he's talking about he being Antiochus IV, going against the king of the south, which we know is Ptolemy the sixth. That's who we're talking about right now. In the center, the Antiochus IV is the king of the north, which is Syria. And then Ptolemy the sixth is the king of Egypt right now, which used to be the Ptolemy Empire. So that's who we're talking about, and these are the kings that have been battling against each other for a while, and will continue to battle. Antiochus IV is the one that is really being talked about in chapter 11 here. And this is the point that the angel is going to be making to Daniel throughout the beginning of this chapter and the end of this chapter, of everything that's happening to the Jewish people, the hardships are going to get harder under Antiochus IV. It's going to come to an end eventually in God's time. And that's what the angel is talking to now. Here's the hard times coming. As we get a little further in, he's going to say, but these are going to end. And this king of the north, he will come to an end as well. So it's good news that it's going to happen, but Daniel doesn't know all these particulars. He doesn't know the king's names. He doesn't know who it is. He doesn't know when it's going to happen. But he's got to have faith in what the angels tell him, that it is finally going to happen. So Antiochus, we're seeing in verse 25, he saw that his kingdom was starting to be built up more and more as he took over power. He's gaining fortune. He's gaining power. He's gaining fame. People are starting to like him in certain areas. But like anybody like that, he wanted more. So he's going to go after something his predecessors never did. He's wanting to take over Egypt completely. And that's what he's starting to do. He's saying, for me to get that, I got to go against the king of the south. I got to go against Ptolemy VI to get Egypt so I can have full control of this. He wanted more and more power. He wanted to reign over both kingdoms, the kingdom of the north, which he did, and the kingdom of the south. Nobody had ever done that before. And that's what he's wanting to do and what he's going to attempt to do. So what does he do? He decides to invade Egypt. So Antiochus IV is using chariots, cavalry, and he even had a large navy fleet that he massed up to go and attack down at Egypt, go attack Ptolemy VI. This actually happened in 169. But at the same time, the king of the south, Ptolemy VI, was saying, you know, I lost a couple of battles. I want to go back and reclaim some of the land I lost. So I'm going to go back up to Palestine to try to get some of the land that I lost. So you got the king of the north, king of the south, always battling against each other. And like I showed before, they're going through the Palestine area to get to each other to have these battles. And God's people are caught in the middle. Antiochus did start a battle. He did capture some fortified cities in Egypt. He killed many Egyptian soldiers, and he wounded just as many as he killed. So he's starting to win this battle. And by doing so, when he's starting to conquer areas, remember, he's still having to pay back tribute to Rome for the battle up in the island of Rhodes. That when Rome got involved, says, now you got to pay 12 years penalty for this battle. So whenever Antiochus VI has a battle, he plunders the area to help pay off that debt, that tax, that 12-year tax that the Romans put on him. So when he's starting to conquer a little bit of Egypt, he's taking the gold, he's taking the silver, he's taking anything of value for him to pay off this tribute. Now I'm talking about like this war already happened. This war is going to be happening in the future. And that's what the angel's saying here. These things are going to happen. So I'm giving you the detail that I can read, but we can read in the Maccabees and elsewhere of what these particular things are. And when I get into verse 26, 27, 28, we're going to talk more about this little bit of war, more about these people and some of the other things that happened. And verse 25 ends with, it talks about schemes will be devised against him. So when I first started reading 23, 26, it talked about an alliance was made. Well, when these folks were making an alliance, Antiochus IV and Ptolemy VI, they were sitting around the same table together, which we're going to read in a couple of verses. It gets into a little detail about that. They were trying to make a peace treaty with each other. They didn't like what was happening on the battlefield because they weren't getting what they wanted. So both of these kings were sitting down at the same table, trying to make an alliance, but it wasn't working out. The agreement wasn't working out because they're saying, I want this, it didn't happen. So they're telling each other lies at this table. As they're making an agreement, I won't attack you. In the back of my mind, when I see my time, I'm going to come get you. So Antiochus was a smooth talker. We read about that before, and we talked about that. He could really influence people with his speech, and he could really win them over. And that's what he was doing here when he was making that alliance and is talking about for schemes will be devised against him. Antiochus never had any intent to stay true to the alliance that he made with Ptolemy. He was planning, he was scheming to attack him when the time was right. And that's what's being talked about at the end of verse 25. And in the end, we know Antiochus actually did go and attack Ptolemy. Verse 24 talked about a time of tranquility that's leading up to the attack of Antiochus going. A peaceful time. Ptolemy the Sixth was relaxed. Verse 23, we read about the alliance here, and when we get to verse 27, it's going to be talking about the same type of alliance of what's going to be sitting, that these two kings are going to be sitting at the same table, making this alliance. And that's what was a little confusing to me about this. You read a little bit in verse 23, 25, 26, you say, okay, here's the table set up, and then it's talking about again later on, giving a little bit more detail in verses 27, 28, and 29. Any questions? Verse 26 is going, those who eat his choice foods, those who eat Ptolemy the Sixth's choice foods will destroy him. Meaning that whoever's eating some of these choice foods that Ptolemy's providing, they're actually going to be the one that's going to be the downfall of Ptolemy in the end. They are the ones. And we read earlier in Daniel about the phrase there, those who eat his choice foods. Remember when? Way back in Daniel 1 with when Daniel was and his friends were taken captive by Nebuchadnezzar. The elite that Nebuchadnezzar thought was the best ate his choice foods as they were being trained to be put in his court. The same phrase is used, those who eat his choice foods, that back in Daniel 1. And the same thing's going here. So the people that king, not just Nebuchadnezzar, but we're seeing Ptolemy here, the people he wants in his court, the people that he trusts, that he relies on the most, they are getting the best food. They're getting the best nutrition that they're partaking of. And that's what this is saying here. But it's also implying that these people that eat his choice foods are people that he trusts, that Ptolemy the Sixth trusts, people that he relies on, people he can count on, people he doesn't think is going to stab him in the back. And that's what this is referring to here. And it goes on and it says that his army will overflow. He's massing a large army, but many will fall down slain. All this is referring to what's going to happen to Ptolemy and to, in the end, Nebuchadnezzar. But verse 26 is referring to what's going to happen to Ptolemy the Sixth. And as I talked about, those who will eat his choice foods is referring to two of his advisors, Ulysses and Lanius. These two folks, they're not up there. These two folks actually ruled over Egypt for a little while. Why I threw this up there was because when Cleopatra, that we see there in the middle, she married Ptolemy the Fifth, and she's the sister of Antiochus the Fourth. Cleopatra, she was acting in regent, meaning she was temporarily in control of Egypt, because who was next to take throne was not old enough. Her son, Ptolemy the Sixth, was still a youth. So in the meantime, she was acting regent. But when she died, these two men, Ulysses and Lanius, were actually running Egypt. So there was no official king running it. Cleopatra was acting as a regent until her son was going to be old enough to take charge and be king of Egypt. But in the meantime, these two men who were, eating the choice food of Ptolemy the Sixth, because remember, he's not old enough right now, that they were the ones that ran the country. So when Ptolemy the Sixth was old enough, Ulysses and Lanius became his advisors. Does that make sense? Did I lose anybody on that? Okay. So these two men that used to run Egypt is now serving Ptolemy the Sixth, because, I had to jump back in time again to get him up to age, Ptolemy the Sixth. But these two men, Ulysses and Lanius, are now the advisors for Ptolemy the Sixth, and they encouraged him. They're the one that said, you got to go reclaim some of the territory that we had lost. You need to go up toward Palestine and get some of that territory back, which is what this part of this war was happening, that Ptolemy the Sixth wanted to go get back some of the territory he lost in previous battles. You getting ready to raise your hand, Ted? Okay. He's sitting here like this. I just didn't want to cut him off. So these two men are telling Ptolemy, go get some of this territory. which he started to go to the battle. But later on during that battle, these two men also instructed him, saying, hey, this ain't going well. You need to leave and flee. So at one point they're saying, you need to go attack. And when the attack's not going well, they say, hey, Ptolemy, you need to go and flee and leave this area. So these two men are looking out for his best interests, don't really know. I haven't found anything conclusive to say that they were truly looking out for his best interest, or they're wanting him to go up to attack to maybe get defeated, leave, maybe get caught, so they could again regain control of Egypt. I haven't found anything either way on that. So that's still kind of up in the air of what it is, in my opinion, unless somebody has an opinion on that. At the end of verse 26, it's saying, many will fall down. That's talking about the battle that's going on. A lot of people, a lot of Egyptians died in this battle that was going on. But there was a city of Alexandria in Egypt. They held out against Antiochus IV. And then because of that, because they provided resistance, Antiochus IV did not take control over Alexandria. These people hid out. And the leading people serving Ptolemy VI in his court in Alexandria, they declared Ptolemy VI's younger brother, Ptolemy VII, to be king. So Ptolemy VI was ruling over Egypt, was ruling over Alexandria. Ptolemy VI listening to his advisors to go attack this area, which in turn caused Antiochus IV to come down and attack them. The people in Alexandria resisted. They no longer liked what their king, Ptolemy VI, was doing. So they said, we don't want you anymore. We want your younger brother. I don't have him on there. I don't have him on that sheet. Ptolemy VII, we recognize him as our king in the area of Alexandria. So that's quite a change of power. They're saying, we don't like what you're doing. We want your younger brother to come, and he's going to take control over the area here that we're living in Alexandria. I don't know if I have it. We'll get to it. I don't know if you can see it almost in the middle of the screen at the edge. The left name is Alexandria. That's the area that we're talking about here. That's the area that did not give in to Antiochus IV. They're the ones that put up resistance. They're the ones that said, Ptolemy VI, we don't want you. We want your younger brother to rule over us. Those are the folks in that little area there that put up enough resistance to resist the great and powerful Antiochus IV. So that little piece of land, they put up a great resistance there. And we're going to see why when we get into these next few verses. Any comments? Any questions? A lot of information here. And this battle that's going on with verses 23 through even 27, 28, it jumps back and forth of what's happening. It gives a little bit of the story, and it says, oh, here's an alliance, and 4 verses later, here's what's happening, how this alliance came about. And we're going to be seeing that here in verse 27. Verse 27 and 28 of Daniel 11. As for both kings, their heart will be intent on evil, and they will speak lies to each other at the same table. This is referring to making an alliance. They're both sitting down, and they're not telling each other the truth of what's going to happen. But it will not succeed, for the end is to come at the appointed time. Then he will return to his land with much plunder, but his heart will be set against the holy covenant, and he will take action and then return to his own land. Verse 28 is talking completely about Antiochus IV. But let's talk about verse 27. Both kings that they're talking about here, the kings, are Antiochus IV and Ptolemy VI. Both tried to negotiate each other, as I mentioned before in verse 23, talking about let's get an alliance together. But they're sitting there. They know they're not gaining any ground on the battlefield, so they're trying to tell each other what they think the other wants to hear, but they're lying to each other. And it's just not working out. So eventually they break from the table, and life goes on between the king of the north, king of the south, between the Syrians and Egypt, and battles continue. This battle that's going to be raging on, that has raged on, that we talked about a little bit, eventually Antiochus IV does get the bulk of Egypt, and he's holding the upper hand, and eventually he does capture Ptolemy VI. that capture eventually does happen, but it's only after a while. And you would think when one king captures another king, what do you think they'd do to him? You think they'd execute him. But Antiochus IV did not do that. He did not execute Ptolemy VI. He actually had intention and did do reestablishing Ptolemy VI as on the throne as a king of Egypt. He reestablished him as a puppet. He didn't want him to take control. Antiochus wanted to be in power, but he knew that he'd get resistance from the people of Egypt, so he reestablished Ptolemy VI as a puppet leader in Egypt. And he was hoping to gain control of Egypt. But it didn't work, because Ptolemy VI was saying, you put me in power, I'll do exactly what you say. Lying again, king to king. His intent was to take back his intent being Ptolemy VI was take back all of Egypt, both from Antiochus and from his brother. He wanted to go back and get Alexandria because he felt betrayed of what happened there by his brother and the people of Alexandria. So Ptolemy VI is trying to take back the land that he lost from Antiochus, the king of the north, and from his brother who reestablished kingdom there in Alexandria in Egypt. The kingdom that Ptolemy VI was put in was not the entirety of Egypt. It was a little bit smaller. It was an area called Memphis, and he did quite well for himself there. He was able to stay alive. He was able to stay out of the battles. He did not go and conquer the king of the north. He did not go and conquer Alexandria. He just kind of laid waste and stayed there himself. He did not fulfill the plans that he initially had intent on when Antiochus IV put him in power in that area. And then at the end of verse 26, it talks about, for the end is still to come at the appointed time. It has nothing to do with the kings fighting against each other, nothing to do on this earthly thing. It's saying that at the appointed time, remember, this is the angel talking to Daniel. All these battles that are going on, all these hardships that are going on, all these bad things that are happening to God's people, that is going to come to an end. And it's going to come to an end when God decides it's going to come to an end. And that's what the angel is telling Daniel here at the end of verse 27. Don't worry about these kings. Don't worry about the hardships. It's not lasting forever. It is going to come to an end. Not just for the hardship for God's people, but for these two kings as well. And that's the point that the angel's making to Daniel here in verse 27. And all along in Daniel, when he prayed, he was praying, when is this torment and torture going to stop happening to God's people? All along he's prayed that, and he's had angels come to him on multiple occasions saying, here's what's going to happen, but it is going to end. God is going to end this. And that's what's happening here in chapter 11. Throughout chapter 10 and 11, it's been this whole thing going on. In chapter 11 is this angel talking this whole time of what is going to happen to God's people, and that it is going to end. And we're going to see more of that later on. Yes, Ted? I'm going to say us. Christ.
The coming of the Messiah. That's why this is important. It's for us, not for them. And
Right, and those few people we don't really read because that's between the Old and New Testament.
Well, no, there was a few people that said,
The-
like the two that
In
talked about
in Daniel's time,
Gospels when Jesus was a baby, that they were waiting for the Messiah.
yes.
Specifically, there were people at that time that knew that history had all happened, that God had been telling the truth, and they were looking for Jesus. And I believe the Magi were the same way. They had studied that Old Testament as distributed by Alexander the Great beforehand, and they knew it was time. Unfortunately, the Jewish leaders did not because they didn't take it that way.
New Testament says up there, the sign of the time, you don't understand the shit. You don't know.
This is not stuff that, like most people say nowadays, that they say that this stuff that Daniel's talking about is going to happen at the end just
No.
before Jesus comes back. And it's not true. It was written for us, it's history that happened to point to and up to the time of Jesus. And they missed the whole point.
And it's been,
The beauty of it.
it's been several weeks since I've tried to make that point as well. I did just a little bit today. This is pointing to Christ coming, his birth. It is not pointing to his second coming. It is not.
When we read this and we understand this history, we should shudder with praise for God and awe for his understanding of what happened before, or what he said would happen before it ever happened. And this is only one account, Daniel's account.
Yes.
It permeates the Old Testament, and especially in the prophets.
I don't know if you saw last week online. Yeah, I went.
I did watch it.
Okay, I went into the detail for those that weren't here about one incident that happened that was recorded in the Maccabees that is not recorded in the Bible whatsoever, and it's about how one little thing that one person did that he was told to go in and loot this area and why he didn't. And the Maccabees told the whole story. I read about 2.5 pages of why he didn't, instead of just saying he didn't because the Bible says he wasn't going to do it. Well, here's the whole story why. So many integral things that took place for him not to go and loot like he was supposed to, like he was ordered to from the king. And when he went back to the king, he was saying, look, the king says, who should I send? He said, send your worst enemy there, because whoever goes, if they come back, they're going to come back beaten and battered as bad as could be. And the whole story was there. There's more of this history for us to read and understand, like Ted's saying this. This is all for us. Everything here that's being told about Daniel is Daniel's not understanding it, and it's told for us. So there's a lot more history that I'm not going into that's recorded in the Maccabees, and it's
What Cliff is doing here can be a little bit confusing, not because he's being confusing, but because he's doing two things at the same time. Number one, he's telling us what was written by Daniel, that Daniel could not understand what was happening, but Cliff is telling us what happened after the fact at the same time. In other words, Daniel, this is what's going to happen. Cliff's saying, this is what Daniel was told, and this was happening.
right. It,
Two things simultaneously.
it,
Well, it could be if somebody, all I'm saying is,
It's-
it can be if somebody doesn't understand it.
it's confusing to me, and I'm reading, I'm studying it. It's because I'm trying to do the parallel of here's what it's saying. It's like, now here's what it said, not fact checked. Did this really happen? You find the resource and say, this really did happen, and it aligns up perfectly with what's recorded in Daniel. Bill.
Which, for those of us that don't have a great joy for history, understanding the implications of history in relationship to ourselves, to Christ come, stuff like that, would give me a little bit more interest to want to study the history.
One other thing to go along with what Bill just said. Daniel is telling prophecy. Historically, it happened.
Yes. If you would ever get the chance to read any part of the Maccabees or stories about the Maccabees, books about them, I highly recommend it, because I just got a scratch of understanding of this, of what actually happened in this time period of what we're reading here in Daniel to Christ coming. It's astounding that the lineage of Christ happened. There had to be divine intervention for it to happen, to not be eradicated during the time of Daniel that he is living and what he's being told about now through the various kings that come into place, especially Antiochus IV, and then later on the Roman Empire to take in charge. It's astounding that the lineage of Christ survived all those hundreds of years and not get eradicated and wiped out. Just by reading the few stories that I had in the Maccabees and other commentaries, it's just amazing that it happened. So it tells you, without a doubt, God had his hand in it. Without a doubt, his hand is in it for Christ to be born. It just didn't slip through the cracks. It's amazing to read that history. And when Bill said, who don't like history, my hand was the first to go up. I'm not a fan of history. As I mentioned, I talked to my history teacher to how do I teach some of these things. But the more and more I dug into it and some of this Maccabees and some of the Daniel stuff, I still don't like history, but it's interesting, it's exciting. It's like, this makes sense over here, and it's pointing me back to this story here, and it starts tying itself together and starts building on each other. And knowing the end is that Christ is coming, that Christ is going to be born, makes it even more interesting.
I agree with everything that Ted said. In addition, I always try to think about the Jews at the time that these events are happening. Daniel was written in around 500 BC. These events are happening 300 or so years later. I believe that Daniel was known to the Jews 300 years later when these events happened. And I had not thought to try to look up to see what the Jewish people in their own history interpreted Daniel to be talking about back then. But it would seem to me that if we're able to understand the events of history here in Daniel 11 in real history, that the Jews who lived during that time, who were very, very interested in what kings were over them and what kings were doing and hurting them or maybe tolerating them or whatever, I would like to think that the Jews read in 160 BC these words and thought, this is also God telling us that we're not going to be always under their rule, that we're going to be protected by God and we're going to survive and we're going to continue as a people. Now, I don't have any proof of that. But since Daniel was known to the Jews all through history, it would seem to me that that would be very possible.
I mean, it makes perfect sense. I would hope to help support that by roughly 605. That's when the Jews were taken captivity by the Babylonian Empire. Daniel was roughly 15. Throughout Daniel's entire life, from the age of 15 to roughly 85, he was a captive. But Daniel wasn't just a normal captive. He served under Nebuchadnezzar's court. He served under some of the Persian king's court. So he had a name out there. It wasn't just, this is a slave. This is a slave, a captive that served on a king's court. Then the next king that took over, he served on his court. And the next king that took over, Daniel served on his court. So I believe, like what Terry's saying, the Jewish people knew who Daniel was because he wasn't just a slave that was out there making bricks. He was serving on the king's court, looking out for their best interests, looking out for the best interests of God's people. And these other kings that were taking over, that were up and coming, that were other countries that are going to be fighting who the king that Daniel was serving under, knew who these people in these kings' courts were. So I believe, like Terry said, without a doubt, some of these kings knew who Daniel was. Not because he's out there trying to make a name for him, because he's in the king's court. If you're going to go against somebody, you want to know everything about them. You want to know who's serving them. You want to know their best generals. You want to know who's giving them their information. Daniel was one of these people, not necessarily giving military information, but he's given advice to these kings. So I believe, like Kerry, that the Jewish people knew who Daniel was, even years after Daniel died, and these kings knew who Daniel was, even after Daniel died. Ted.
There was a lot of knowledge of what was said and what was reported in those historical events. They had libraries like we did. You pointed out Alexandria.
And no doubt when it burned down and all that records were gone, people were remembering, people were starting to tell people instead of saying, hey, go look it up. Here's what I read, and it passed on from generation to generation. So a lot of it was lost, but a lot of it wasn't. Great comments. Anything else before we go on? Terry?
I would say the Jews knew about Daniel because they considered it holy scripture to God. They knew about it, they knew about Alexandria maybe, but they knew about it in Palestine. I think that they had their synagogues and their priests down in Jerusalem that spent time reading the books of the Old Testament and time reading Daniel to understand what Daniel was saying, and I think they understood that these verses that we're reading here, we're talking about some of the events that were happening in their lifetimes.
Absolutely.
I agree with that, Terry. I wasn't saying it for the Jewish people. I was saying that there was references to this stuff for the rest of the world to read.
Yes.
In other words, I agree with you.
Ted and Terry agree. Great. Anything else before we move on? I'll try to get through verse 28 before we're done for today. Anything else? Verse 28 is talking about he will return to his land. This is talking about Antiochus the fourth. I mean, he's had enough of these stalemate negotiations, and he wanted to return to his land. And so he did. He returned to Syria. And where this meeting took place, I don't exactly know. But on his way back to Syria, he stopped in Jerusalem. So it tells me he was more toward Egypt than he was toward Syria, because on his way back home, he's stopping in Jerusalem. And as a good king would do, he raids the temple. Again, he's wanting more and more of his money. He's wanting more of that fortune that he thinks is his, whether it's to fund the coffers for his soldiers, whether it's to just put money in his pocket, whether it's to pay off that tax debt. Don't know the reason for it, but he's raiding the temple. And it's recorded through, in the Maccabees, I got all this. Here's the bulk of what he took. He took the golden altar. He took the lampstand. He took all the utensils. He took the table of bread of presents. He took the cups for the drink offering. He took all the golden bowls. He took all the golden censers. He took the curtain, the crowns, the gold decorations from the front of the temple. He took all the gold and silver that was in there, that was for offering, that was for the widows and orphans. He took all that gold and silver. And he took any other treasures that he thought was worthwhile to take. That's what he did to the temple on his way back to Syria. And then he had the nerve to set up a garrison there, and anybody that didn't abide by his wishes, they were killed by this garrison of people that Antiochus IV left in Jerusalem at the temple. And Antiochus took all this, went back to his homeland up in Syria. And then a little more detail of what's going on here recorded in the Maccabees. It's not a whole page, it's just a quarter page. Antiochus IV had no just cause for that ravage in our temple that he made. He only came to it when he wanted money without declaring himself our enemy, and attacked us while we were his associates and friends. Again, his smooth talker. I'm your king, I'm here for you. But yet he comes in and steals and ravages from the temple, and he has people killed there. Then Antiochus' need for money broke his league, or broke his agreement with the Jews, and he plundered their temple when it was full of gold and silver. This is recorded in the Maccabees. I didn't write down which one it was, but this is their account of what Antiochus IV did when he was leaving this table where he agreed to make an agreement and a treaty with Ptolemy, when he was heading back to Syria, when he stopped and plundered and raided the temple. This is the Maccabees' account saying, this is what our king did to us. He's saying he's our friend, but yet he comes through and he's ravaging, he's stealing from the temple, just because he wants and needs money. That is the type of person Antiochus IV is. That is what he's doing to his own kingdom, to his own people that he's got rule over. And yet, as we read later on, he despises the Jews. And if this is what he's doing to people that he says are his friends, what do you think we're going to read about later on when we get to what he does to the Jewish people? It's terrible things that he does to the Jewish people. Anything before we go today? Bob, then Bill.
He was taking money from all the circumcision, the kids and stuff, to eat like the Jews. And then also the ladies that were pregnant, he was taking them for them because they didn't want the Jews
later on, we talk about what he does when he goes and captures and what he does to the women and does to the boys. He sells them into slavery. I'll tell you that spoiler right now. He just takes them and sells them into slavery. Bill Venturi.
So just so that I can read from what, that account of Antiochus the Fourth was in there.
Thank you.
I had just
It's
looked
just-
up
but-
Antiochus
and
that
it-
year, so
I've been through so many of them, I don't know which they are anymore. I don't write it down.
I didn't even know that before I saw it.
Terry, thank you.
Wait for 2 months for you to get down to verse 28.
Well, and we're out of time. Sorry.
And now we're one phrase away from will be set against the Holy Covenant. So it's time to go. But can you tell me what you think the Holy Covenant is? Is that another way of saying the Jews?
You're going to have to wait till next week.
I think I'll
Sorry.
be here next week.
I got page 7 through page 18 here. I got 11 pages to talk about you, Terry. We'll talk about that.
I'll be here.
Well, that gets him here. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it.